Hi, I'm Heather from Heather Handmade, and today I am going to teach you how to make a reversible fabric basket. The pattern is free from Madame Sew, and I'm just going to walk you through the steps today. So this is the large size that I have already made. It's cute and large, and it has little handles for holding it, and I am going to work on the small size. I'm going to teach you that today. So while I am starting, I would love it if you comment with something you hope to make this weekend. So while you guys are commenting and starting with that, I am going to start fusing the fleece to my pieces. I've already cut them out, so let me show you the pieces. So you have two outer pieces. You can see this is a dark blue. Then I have the bottom piece and two strap pieces. Then I have the lining, and I'm doing a polka dot, but it's in the opposite colorway. You can see on this large one, I did a different color or a different fabric on the bottom, both inside and outside, because it was nice to use up scraps. So it does use up some fabric, but it's a great way to use up your scraps and kind of piece it together in a really fun way. So I am putting my fusible fleece. I'm going to iron it onto my outside pieces. This is the pieces that will be on the outside of the basket. It is reversible, but I decided I wanted dark blue on the outside because it's less likely to get dirty and show that it's dirty. So let me move this over. This is just like a, oh, I don't know, I don't remember what it's called. This is like a pressing thing that it's made out of felt, so I can iron right at my desk and I'm not going to ruin my desk. So that's pretty awesome. So I'm going to fuse this fleece to my pieces just right here. So if you didn't hear at the beginning, I'd love it if you commented with something you hope to make this weekend. Maybe you're hoping to sew something or finish something. I'd love to hear about what you like to sew or what you're working on. It's always inspiring to hear about other people's projects. So the great thing about this wool thing, which now I can't remember what it's called because I'm on camera, is that the felt holds the heat and kind of pushes it back. So it really helps. It's better than an ironing board because it holds the heat and pushes it back. And then we have the last pieces. So the great thing about this pattern is that it has two sizes. So the one I'm making is going to be a lot smaller because the pieces are a lot smaller, but this is a really nice size. You know, it could hold a lot of things depending on what you want to use it for. I think the smaller one would work better for like if you want to do like a drawer organizer, and the large one would be more for like a shelf or like in a cabinet or something. So the fusible fleece is important because it helps the basket have shape, and it makes it strong but like still squishy. So like this bag is holding its shape, but it's like it's not way hard. It wouldn't be hard to sew. Okay, so those are fused and they are ready to use. So the first thing we're going to do is the straps. So you can see that I have my fleece, and it's smaller because it's easier to sew through your seams when your fusible fleece isn't in the way. So what you're going to do is you're going to fold your straps right sides together like this, and you're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to move that. And you're going to do that to both straps. So let me do that really fast. And let me know if you have questions. I'll try to keep up with them in the comments as I go. Okay, so now we're going to turn these straps right side out, and I have found when I put I like to use a safety pin. That's my favorite way to turn things right side out, and when I put it into my, like the part that's going to show, I find it kind of pulls a hole into the fabric. So I like to put the safety pin into the seam allowance at the top. I don't know if you can see that. And then when I flip it right side out, I push the safety pin into the strap, like into the inside. You open it up. Hold on, I'm having a hard time. There we go. So then I push my safety pin inside, and then I turn it right side out. And that way all of that stress that you're putting onto the fabric, like from the safety pin, it's going onto the seam allowance, and it's not hurting your fabric that's going to show. And it's a little tricky to turn the strap right side out with that fusible fleece. It's not as easy as just like a regular strap or a regular tube, but you just got to work at it. If you guys have any tips, like an awesome way to turn tubes right side out, then you guys can leave them in the comments, because I'm not very fast at turning them right side out. So there's one, and then I'm going to turn the other one. So I go into the seam allowance, and then turn it right side out. Oh, Janet said trimming the seam allowance helps. So if you trim the seam allowance first before you turn it, that will help a lot, because then you won't have so much bulk of the seam allowance inside. So that's a fantastic tip to help you turn your tubes right side out. So now I'm just, fiddling with it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to press it open with the seam. Do you see how this is the seam right here? We're going to press it so the seam is on the back. You're putting it in the center on the back. So we're going to press that flat. So there's one, and then we're going to do the other one. And you want that seam to be in the back so that you don't see it in the end. You want it to hide. So now we're going to add a little bit of quilt, like top stitching, like quilting. So I'm just going to do 2 rows of stitching right down the, like almost the center of the strap, and that just makes it, this is optional, it just makes it look really nice. The quilted look makes it look really nice. Okay, so let me show you. There are my handles with the top stitching. It makes it look really nice. So for the small ones, I think you just need 2. for the large ones, I don't know if you can see because it's a light color, I have 3 rows of stitching. So it depends on the size and kind of what you want. And you can even skip this if you don't want to do this. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to sew the straps onto the bag pieces. But first, we need to mark the strap placement. So this is one of the pattern pieces. I've already cut off the edge. This is like this piece for the interfacing. So I'm gonna come to my, can you see? Okay. So I'm coming to one of my side bag pieces and I'm putting this down. So this is one of the pins by Madame So. It's the one that the heat makes it disappear. And I've already used this. I used it on the other one and it worked really well. So actually, do you know what? This is blue on blue. It's not going to work. Let me grab the white one. So I have the white pen and I'm going to mark. I'm not marking the whole rectangle. I'm going to mark just each side because I just need to know where the sides of the strap go. I don't need to know where the whole rectangle is going to be. So I'm just marking this carefully, and I love using marking tools that will, be erased when you iron it, just because I like to see it disappear as I iron it. It's really satisfying. And I like to use a pen because you can get a really accurate mark. So I'm just marking that really fast, and let me know if you have any questions. I see some great comments about helping you turn tubes, like using knitting needles or using 2 different sizes of tubes. So, if you have a hard time with doing tubes, that would be, these comments are a great resource to help you. Okay, so I have my 2 marks. Can you see? So you see that white shows up so well. It's nice and crisp. So we're going to pin these straps onto the bag. So make sure that the part with the seam, you want that face down. So you fold the edge over your seam allowance, and it's easy to tell where that is because there's no fusible fleece on the edge. And then you place your strap on to those marks. So just make sure that it's covering the marks well, and then I'm going to pin these in place. Then I'm going to do the same to the other one. And pin these. So you see those pinned on. So when we sew these, we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch from this edge and then sew another 1/8 of an inch in, and that will enclose the fabric, like the seam allowance inside. It will be between those 2 stitching lines. So that's what I'm doing right now for both sides of the bag. So that's done, and it looks like it's a big mess because of all that thread there, but I'm not going to take the time to trim the thread just for the sake of the video and to keep things moving, you know, quickly. But I will go back later and trim all the threads. So these sides are done, and what we're going to do next is we're going to work on our inside, our lining pieces and our outer pieces. We're going to sew the sides. So when you cut it out, you have notches at the top and the bottom. So we're going to match up these sides, and we're going to sew on this side and on this side. So it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to pin and sew along each side, and then we're going to do the same to the lining pieces. Make sure you're doing right sides together, and we're going to sew down those sides. So one is done, and now I'm doing the other one. Okay, so these are done, these are ready, and what I'm going to do next is I'm going to press these seams open. It's a little tricky on these small, on the really small basket. The large one is a little bit easier, but I want to have these seams open before I sew it to the next thing. So I'm putting the seam kind of in the middle so that I don't make a crease on the edge over here. Can you see? Here we go. Just to go down that seam. It just makes that seam nice and crisp and strengthens that thread. Now we're going to do the other one, and this one's a little bit harder because you have the fusible fleece in the way. But you can do it. If you have like a sleeve board or like a sleeve roll or something, that will help. You can slide the basket in that, and that will make it a little bit easier. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we have both of these. We are going to sew, we're going to pin the bottoms and sew the bottoms are. So this is the trickiest because you're sewing something straight to something curved, but you can do it, you just have to go slow, and I like to use a lot of pins. So on the bottom of the basket there are 2 notches and 2 seams, and on the bottom of your circle there are 4 notches, so that's how we're going to match it up to make sure that it's like evenly distributed. So I'm doing right sides together, can you see? And I'm going to first I'm going to match up the 4 notches. And pin those in place, and then I go through and I pin in between. When I was sewing the large basket, I found that the outer basket piece was a little bit easier to do the curve because the fusible fleece kind of kept it stiff, I guess. It made it easier, like I didn't get any tucks or gathers as I was going around, but I felt like on the lining, because there was nothing keeping the fabric stiff, it was just a little bit trickier. So I did maybe have, I had to fix like one or two spots where the fabric had puckered up while I was sewing. So you can see that I've pinned that like this, all that seam allowance together, and now I've got to do the other one, and then I'll talk about how you sew it together after I get this one pinned, because there's kind of two different ways to do it, and some people like one way and some people like the other way. So you got to find the way that works best for you. And let me know if you have questions as I'm going along. If I'm going too fast or too slow, let me know so I can help you out. So I've got those 4 pins, and now I'm pinning in between. Okay, someone asked, how do you fix the puckers that may result? Okay, so I will usually sew the whole thing, and if there are puckers, I will use a seam ripper and I'll unpick probably like 1/2 inch on each side of the pucker, and then I kind of try to adjust, maybe stretch the fabric to get it to go in. I will say sometimes it might not get fixed, and sometimes it does. It's worth it to fix it, to just unpick a little bit, but sometimes if you're working with fabric that's like on the bias, sometimes it's a little tricky to kind of, you know, squish it in place. So when you're sewing the bottom, if you're sewing looking at it this way, then you're going around like this. Okay, so wait, Priscilla asked, is this the fusible fleece that you're pinning now? This is the fusible fleece that is attached to the fabric. So this is the full basket piece. So you can see that this is the fleece and this is the fabric up here. So you can sew from this side where you're looking down at the circle, and the edge is gonna, you know, be with the feed dogs. And this is where most of the circle is it feels larger than the outer edge, so this is where your puckers will happen. So I like to look at this side so that I can control more and kind of see if puckers are happening. I do know that some people like to sew it this way, where you're looking down at the edge and the circle is going with your feed dogs, because the feed dogs can help kind of push any extra fabric along. So it depends on what your preference is and how you like to do it. It's really, you know, up to you, and what works, what makes sense to you is the best way to do it. So I'm going to start sewing this around, and you can, let's see, you can see, so you can see that I'm going to be adjusting and moving it a lot as I sew. Basically between each, like at each pin, I stop, I adjust my fabric, kind of flatten it out, stop at the next pin, take it out, adjust it again. Oh, do you know what? I forgot to do something. Hold on. then when I'm done, I go through and I look to see if there's any puckers on either side. And this one actually looks pretty good. I don't think there's any puckers. So what I forgot to do while I was remembering that on your lining piece that you have the two seams, you actually need to leave a hole in the edge, because that's how at the end you turn it right side out. So you can see on this one, I haven't closed my hole yet. If I pull the lining out, there's a hole right here in the seam. That's how I turned the whole thing right side out. So I'm going to actually use a seam ripper, and I'm just going to make a little hole and open this up. Hopefully you're not sewing this right now and you don't have to seam rip like me. Hopefully you don't have to deal with it. And this is a seam ripper from Madame Sew. It actually has a light on it, so that makes it nice when you are trying to see those tiny stitches. So let me open this up. You just need about 3 inches in the center of the seam. You don't need that much of a hole. So see, I've opened that up. But when you're actually sewing it, you could just leave a hole when you're sewing it instead of going back and fixing it like me. Let's see. So I am going to add a little bit of back stitch so that the hole doesn't keep growing. Because when you turn it right side out, you don't want that hole to get bigger as you pull all that fabric through. So I'm just gonna stitch this real fast. And fix that. Okay, so just make sure you leave a hole in the side so you can turn it right side out. Now I'm going to sew the bottom to the lining piece. This is the one that I find to be trickier because it doesn't have the fleece. So I find the fabric stretches easier, and you kind of have to, you know, push it into the right place to make it all fit. So there's that one sewn, and I'm checking to see. I actually didn't get any. Oh, there's one right there. There is a little tuck right here. Can you see that? I don't know if the camera is focusing. There's a little tuck right there. So I'm going to take my seam ripper again, and I'm going to just unpick like right next to this. I'm just opening like a tiny, it's like a 3/4 of an inch or a whole inch that I just open up. And then I just re-sew that little spot. So I've opened it, let's see, now I've lost my spot. I've opened it right here. I don't think you can see because it's white on white, but I'm just going to stretch this spot and re-sew right here. And I find that if I'm just focusing on one place, it's a little easier to get rid of that, you know, that little tuck that was created. Sometimes you have to adjust the fabric slightly to make it all fit. But I have fixed that, and now there is no tuck. So the next thing we're going to do is trim these notches off, because you don't want them at the bottom of the basket to like get in the way or like make it bulky. So I'm just going through and I'm trimming these notches off. Just makes it a little bit cleaner and less bulky on the inside. We're going to do the same to this one, except now I can't find my notches. Here we go. Okay. So I have that all ready, and now what we're going to do is we are going to, with right sides together, put the lining and the outer piece together. So I'm taking my lining and I'm turning it so that the right side, so this is the outside, the right side of this will slide down inside and it will be facing the right side of this, the outer basket. And then I'm lining up this seam with the lining seam. So we're going to line up the seams on both sides. And then you're going to line up the notches on the top. Oh, and Michelle commented, trimming with pinking shears might help the curves. That's a fantastic idea, and it really helps remove the bulk down at, you know, down inside the basket. It helps a lot with curves. So if you have pinking shears, that's a fantastic option to making the inside of your basket really nice. I know no one's going to see it, but you'll feel good about it being nice on the inside. So I'm pinning along the top of this basket. Let's see. And Kim, thank you about my jacket. This is actually, I pieced this jacket and I quilted it, so it's kind of like wearing a blanket. So it's pretty great. So this is all pinned together here at the top, and we're going to sew around the top with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. I like to sew by looking, like having my foot right down here and having it go like this. I find that easier to have it turning as I'm sewing. So that's the way I'm going to sew it. So that's sewn, and I'm going to trim the notches off the top again, just to make it nice. You don't want to have that extra fabric in there. You can even trim the seam allowance. You can grade it if you want, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to. So now that this is done, you're going to pull out the lining. You're going to find that spot where there is a hole right here, and we are going to turn the whole bag right side out through this hole. So it's a little tricky when you're turning things right side out through a small hole, just because you don't want to rip that seam you've already made. So just kind of work at it, move slowly, but it works out in the end. So I'm pushing my fingers inside, and I'm pushing out the bottom of this basket. So I get a nice, you want a nice corner down there at the bottom. And then you turn your lining inside. Just like that. So what I'm going to do, it's almost done. We're going to do one more stitch at the top, but I'm going to press the top. So when you're pressing the top, you want to roll. Let's see, how can I show you? You want to roll. So do you see how there's white? You can see white right here. You want to roll the seam like I roll it with my fingers, so that you don't see the lining from the front. Does that make sense? So it's either like this, where you see that white, then you roll it, and it hides that white. You want that lining to be down inside, and then you can press that in place. It's a little tricky because this is a really small basket, so it would be hard to iron it in place. So I'm just going to skip it, and I'm going to top stitch real fast. So you're going to top stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and as I sew, I just keep rolling that edge so it's out of the way and out of sight. You don't want the lining to show at all. You want it to be on the inside. So this is going to help the lining stay inside and help that the top of your basket have a nice crisp edge. It also keeps the fusible fleece in place inside. So there is your basket. I still have a lot of threads I haven't trimmed, so that's why it looks a little messy. But do you see that the stitching right there at the top that keeps a nice edge up there? You can push your hand down in the corners to make it nice and crisp. So the last thing, the very, very last thing, is to take a needle and thread and to sew this closed. That's if you want it to be invisible. If you just want to, if you don't, that will make it reversible, so you can use both sides. If you want to go really fast, then you can just top stitch it closed. I'll top stitch this and then show you. So I sewed just like so close to the edge like this. So then when it's flat, there is kind of a little seam that pokes out. Do you see that? That's poking out. But if it's on the inside, I don't really care because I prefer not to hand sew if I don't have to. And that is how you make a fabric basket. It's beautiful, it's fun, it's really functional because you can use it to organize and store things. And it looks cute. You can use your favorite fabric, you can use all your scraps. So there's this big one that you can make and the small one. You see, you can compare the size. You can make nesting baskets to have this one sit inside this one. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you learned something and you enjoyed it. I hope that you go and make a basket and that you can share it with Madam So they can see that you make it. Thank you so much. I hope you have a really wonderful day.